How much tax do we actually pay in BC? I know some people would simply say way too much, but they wouldn't be able to answer the question much better than that. In this video, we'll try to get a better answer. Let's start off with a big picture and look at how much tax Canadians pay compared to citizens of other rich nations. But before we get into the data, I invite you to try a quick thought experiment. Think of a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is the country where people pay the least tax, and 10 is the country where people pay the most. Now, on that scale, where do you think Canada sits? Are we at the high end, at 8 or above, or are we comparatively low, maybe a 3 or below? Now think of where you wish Canada ranked on that scale. Most of you probably wouldn't want to be at 10, but would we really want to be 1 or 2? Now let's look at the data. This chart shows tax as a percent of GDP in 34 rich countries. Tax as a percent of GDP is a rough measure of overall taxation, but it's useful in terms of making comparisons between different jurisdictions. As you can see in these 2010 numbers, Canada sits below the average for the 34 countries. It's somewhere between a 3 and a 4 on that 10-point scale. In Canada, taxes account for about 30% of GDP. The average for all these countries is about 34%. Let's take a look at the low-tax countries, the ones where taxes make up about 25% of GDP. These countries include Australia, Korea, the United States, Chile, and Mexico. The high-tax countries, all European, sit at about 40%. Austria, Finland, France, Norway, Italy, Belgium, Sweden, and Denmark, which tops off the list at just below 50%. So at least as of 2010, Canada can probably be best described as a fairly low-tax country, sitting somewhere between the average and the bottom. And using this chart, we can also look back in time. In 2005, you can see Canada still sitting below the average. However, in 2000, here, and in 1995, here, you can see that we were slightly above average. Over the 15 years covered by this chart, taxes in Canada have generally declined. In 1995, you can see we're at about 35.5%. In 2000, it's about the same. In 2005, that's dropped by more than 2 points to 33%. And then it drops another 2 points by 2010. Taxes fell in Canada faster than the average for this group of countries. If you go through this chart, you'll see that there are very few nations where taxes have fallen so quickly. Now, let's look within Canada. The first point to make about this chart is that it does not include federal taxes. This was done to provide clear comparisons between the provinces. This means that the percentages here will be a fair bit lower than what we just saw at the national level. Canada's provinces, as always, make for a nice 10-point scale, and here in 2009, we can see BC at number 3, right above a couple of oil-rich provinces, Alberta and Newfoundland. Albertans pay the least amount of tax at 9% of GDP. British Columbians, Ontario, and the other two prairie provinces are all very similar at roughly 13%. Residents in the smaller Atlantic provinces pay a bit more tax, and Quebecers pay the most at 18% of GDP. In this chart, we can switch on different years to do comparisons. So we'll switch on 2005, 2000, 1995, and 1990. Newfoundland, as you can see, has had the most dramatic change over this time period. Alberta has also been quite up and down. At the other end, both PEI and Quebec have seen steady increases. In BC, we've gone up and down over the years, but we haven't strayed far from that 13% level. So to answer our question, how much tax do we pay in BC? We saw that Canada sits at the low end of rich nations in terms of taxes, and that taxes have generally been falling over time. Within Canada, BC is also on the low end. Although taxes have gone up and down, in 2009 they were about where they were 20 years earlier. Now, looking at tax as a share of GDP is a fairly crude way of measuring taxation, but it does a good job of giving us a basic understanding of where we sit relative to other regions. Of course, these charts won't answer the really big questions about taxation, such as, are we paying too much or too little? Are we getting our money's worth? Those answers you'll have to determine for yourselves. But hopefully this background knowledge will be helpful. If you want more details on this topic, feel free to explore these charts for yourself at BC Factbase. If you discover any particularly interesting trends or you think I've got something wrong, please leave comments. Also, I'd love to hear what topics you'd like me to cover next. You can subscribe to BC Factbase through Twitter and Facebook. You can also hit the subscribe button on the website to get email updates. My name is Peter Severinson. I am the author of BC Factbase, and I hope you'll check back often for more.